Okay, now we're in Palo Alto, California, ProMotion Video, Steve Hazelton and Dennis Parker with Jay Eitel, a man of many stories, and you're the senior of the guys that we interviewed today, starting with Bob Machen and then John Randush. And so, where'd you grow up at and how'd you get started, Jay?
Well, I was lucky. I had, on my mother's side, a very famous engine man, and I guess I got the genes from my mother. My father was a stone cutter, so obviously he didn't build cars or anything else. And so I just loved automobiles from the day I was born. And as I told you just a minute ago, I built my first car in 1926 in Clovis, California, which is near Fresno, and it was a Harley Davidson one-cylinder belt drive. And my dad moved to Oakland in 1930, so my brother and sister could go to the University of California. And I carried some of my car junk up to Oakland, and I found that Oakland was a fabulous city in those days. God, it had everything. Good climate and everything.
Because you were a farm boy then from Clovis, huh?
Hot summers and foggy winters, and Oakland was just wonderful. And I met Jerry Piper, who went to Tech High School, and unfortunately I went to University High School, which was the wrong place for me. But anyway, we were good friends, and Piper's father was a painter, and he had an old Model T that had a rod out of it, and sitting there forever. And I said to Piper, let's fix that dumb thing up and take the truck body off of it and go somewhere. So we did, and we fixed the connecting rod and took the ferry over to San Francisco and fussed around with this crazy old Model T. And then gradually, I don't know just exactly when we started to go to San Jose, to the speedway there, which was a 5/8 mile high bank dirt track. It was famous in those days. And we had another friend that I forgot to mention, was oh God, I'll think of his name in a minute. Anyway, finally we got cars, and I had a 23 Durant, and Bob Feehan was the guy. He had a 28 Model A Roadster, one of the first ones built. And lo and behold, we went down to San Jose, and Feehan ran his stock 28 Ford around the racetrack. And Freddie Agabishian was there with a real hot car. And the guys from San Francisco were all there, and geez, that was something to really see. And we didn't have the money or the horsepower to fool around there. But we spent a lot of time there looking at the cars and everything else. And we met Bert Truebody, who worked in a garage in East Oakland. And he had a 27 Chevrolet that ran at San Jose real good. And we were all together. And finally, the Oakland Auto Club was put together, and we all belonged to that. And Freddie Agabishian had the Berkeley Club, and the Italian boys had the San Francisco thing. And we gradually were fussing around, and lo and behold, the midgets started in California, Northern California. I maintain, and we've had a lot of arguments over that. But Ken Brenneman had the most beautiful little midget that you could ever imagine, front-wheel drive, with a Indian motorcycle engine in it and everything. and wire wheels and the whole works. Just absolutely a beautiful, scaled down, big car. And Charlie Baker was an old timer, and he put together the Oakland club called STAR, S-T-A-R, Short Track Racing Association, and he had an old midget with a Harley Davidson in it that was a pile of junk, but he gave it to Fian and myself and Piper to, he had to pass a driver's test, and we all got to do it in that old Model T. Model T, Harley Davidson,
Yeah.
Model T rear end, Model T front end is where the T came into it. And Piper talked himself into being number one, and I was number two, and Fian was number three. So I worked on that bloody car and engine and everything else. And we had 5 tracks that we raced in. The one that was our home base was Neptune Beach, which is a good full quarter-mile track, good dirt, and it's in Alameda.
In Alameda, okay.
Where the big roller coaster was. And the guys from Fresno used to come up there on Tuesday night, and then I can't remember where we started in to expand that thing, but finally we went to Stockton, which was the most god-awful track in the world. It was a big quarter mile, and it went down into this turn, which was just wide enough for one car, like that. Then the other one was where the grandstand was supposed to be, and this thing was about 100 feet tall. And we ran there, and we ran in Vallejo, I think, Thursday night, and Fresno Sunday night. And all of the time that we were racing and everything, so we had to work and make a living because you never made a dime. The purses were nothing in those days because the people paid 40 cents to get into the racetrack in those days. And so maybe the purse was about $90 split up amongst everybody. That was it. So anyway, the cars kept getting bigger and better, and more of them showed up and everything else. And lo and behold, I'm going to skip back a little bit. About the second year that we were working on the old Harley, a friend of mine, name was Eastman, was working on a midget with a 3-cylinder Nash. We used to cut the engines in half because we needed 100 cubic inches, and there wasn't any.
So it's a 6-cylinder Nash.
It was a 6-cylinder Nash. I forgot to mention that they cut straight 8 Marmons in half to 4-cylinder, and they were 90 cubic inches. Half of the Marmon was 180, and they were heavy as the devil, but they went good. I have pictures of those cars and everything. And the old Nash was just about able to make the main event in those days. And then finally, I got the campground for him, and we moved up in the main event. And then all during the winter, he made a cylinder head for it out of steel and welded elbows and everything else. And then we moved up the next year pretty good in the main event. And all of this time, I was working in a garage in Oakland for a guy named P.E. Gooch. And Piper was hanging around there all of the time, and Gooch bought a midget from Fresno wasn't a bad-looking car, but the engine in it, the crankcase was a 4-cylinder Henderson motorcycle, and the fellow in Fresno made a cylinder block out of steel tubing and sheet metal, welded it up, and used a locomobile cylinder head, which a locomobile was a straight 8 with 2 4-cylinder heads on it. And it was really a pile of junk. And so, lo and behold, at that same time, a fellow in Los Angeles called Keim, I think it was Keim or something like that, had made the cylinder block out of cast iron to fit on this Henderson crankcase, and made a cylinder head out of cast iron. And the guys in Fresno, Ernie Locke had the first one. He was a big welding shop down there. And then Jackie Sears got one, and one other one in Fresno. And Gooch bought this castings, and I machined those things up on the machine shop in the garage where I worked at night. And I had to make a crankshaft out of a big block of steel in this little old belt drive lathe. It took me weeks to do that because we didn't have the tools like today. But anyway, we got it done and had it ground. There was a fellow in Oakland that had a crankshaft grinder. And we put that thing together, and it really ran beautiful. We would have probably won the championship, except for the time we were taking the old engine out and putting the new one in and getting everything working, because Skeets Jones, I forgot to tell you this, was driving a 3-cylinder Pontiac, which was cutting 6-cylinder in half. And a fella came up from Los Angeles with a Keim and was going to Australia with a bunch of cars, and didn't want to take this Keim over there because they were really a tender engine. So he traded the Keim for the Pontiac, and Skeets won the championship with that car. And his brother Casey Jones was a fabulous mechanic, and he made that thing run and pretty well stayed together. And so Piper and Jones were the two guys from Northern California that were really running good.
So that was a championship for Star.
For Star, right. That was long before BCRA ever showed up. And anyway, the little Keims were the fastest cars in that circuit at that time, and lo and behold, Andy Guthrie talked his boss into buying the first Drake that was made in Los Angeles. I have pictures of that car.
This is a Drake Offenhauser. Is that correct?
Offenhauser made the engine, the Drake, on a Harley crankcase, water-cooled cylinders with no head gasket. They were just like an Offie, the valve angles and everything else. It ran on alcohol and was only to start with 90 cubic inches, but it gradually got up to 100. Well, they built that Drake in Los Angeles to run with the Offies on the Gilmore Stadium. And it could make the main event, but it couldn't touch the Offies. So they sold it to Fresno, and that car came up to Alameda. They loaded that thing off of the trailer and went out and qualified, had fast time, won the trophy dash, won its heat, won its semi, and won the main event. And they had the trailer sitting there, and they ran the car right up on the trailer like that.
And who was driving? Do you remember?
Andy Guthrie.
Okay.
And that thing just had horsepower and torque all over those little Hendersons. And so that was the end. And Piper was able to get a Drake, and Billy Vukovich got a Drake, and God, I can't remember all of the guys that got the Drakes, but anyway, that was the end of the world because that let the Ford 60s in. And that was the end of midget racing as far as I was concerned. You go to the racetrack, and there'd be 24 cars in the B race, 24 in the main event. They were all identical, except for the color and the number on them. And if some guy was lucky tonight and everything went good, he'd sit in the front row. They were reverse.
Reverse the field.
Reverse the field all the time. And so I got kind of uninterested in midgets. However, I had started to build my own midget when I worked for Gooch just before the war. And I finished that car, and Pearl Harbor came around, and I wanted to get in the Air Force. And like a damn fool, I gave the car practically away, a brand new car, for nothing, to get rid of it. And that car kept running, and after the war, Eddie Wint drove it. And Eddie was not one of the best in the world, but he was pretty good. And so the midgets were the most fun in my life, was to drive a good midget on dirt. There's nothing like it. You're steering with the throttle. You go into the corner, and you cross it up, and then you just work the throttle to keep that thing going. And it's the most fun in the world. I just enjoyed it. And I was lucky a number of years ago. I can't tell you what year it was, but did you ever hear of Baylands?
Correct, yeah.
Okay.
Used to go there all the time.
Yeah. Well, what do they call them, outlaws?
Yeah, the World Outlaws.
World of Outlaws with those wings on them, and they used to run over there.
Right.
And the guys would have the midgets in the sometimes sprint cars over there to putter around. And I had a friend from Los Angeles who worked for the telephone company, and he and I were very good friends. And he had this beautiful little offie that used to run at Gilmore. And Cal Knighty drove the car, and Cal lost a leg. And he drove Indy and everywhere else. And so one night I went down there, and here was Anderson's offie, and I said, "Where's Cal?" He said, "He couldn't come up." And I says, "Well, I guess you can get one of these guys to drive it." And he said, "No, it's got to be an old guy." Here I was in sport clothes and everything else.
Yeah.
And he says, "Why don't you drive it?" And I said, I just can't do that at my age. I haven't been a midget for Humpty Dumpty years. Well, anyway, I got in the car, and somebody came over with a helmet, and the bloody thing was so dark that I couldn't see anything out of it. And I said, "Put me in the back because I don't want to get run over." Well, the track was so bumpy because the big outlaws had been running around there first, and this thing was just like ocean waves. And the belly pan was dragging all the way around. So I looked at this thing on the warm-up laps. We went around like that, and I looked at the first turn, way down on the bottom. It was not wet dirt, it was dry dirt, and looked smooth and everything else. So the guys all went around, and I went down there with that offie and came out first. And I thought that offie would scare me, but it didn't seem to be that ferocious, really and truly. It was wonderful and everything, and I really enjoyed it. And then, lo and behold, they put me in with the big sprint cars. And you weren't supposed to go out there and stand on it. You were supposed to just putt around. That's all you were supposed to do. So anyway, I did the same goddamn trick. And that was a night that I'll never forget in all my life. To get a ride in an offie, which I never thought I would, and to be on dirt, because I wouldn't want to race on asphalt.
Yeah.
Never. Dirt's the only way to go. So anyway, I came home and started a midget.
That was enough motivation for you.
That was enough. I was going to build one just like I had, exactly, only instead of a Ford V8 in it, I was working on a 4-cylinder engine that I had about half finished. And so when I got the car done, the guy that bought the car wanted a 60 in it. So I had to expand the hood and the radiator and everything else. It turned out real pretty. But I got to ride in that thing once at Bakersfield. I got a chance to go out there when they're what they call mud running or something.
Hot lapping, yeah.
Hot lapping. And got one chance to really run my midget. So guess what? I started another one.
So that had a Ford 60 in it?
60, yeah. Which you just bought everything, you know. You didn't make it. You bought a manifold, 2 carburetors, a scintilla magneto. But I made the headers and the water system, and I had the only Ford 60 that could run 40 laps in Bakersfield and not boil. Some of those guys were boiling when they qualified, and they didn't know why. And I figured that out real quick, that at Ford 60, the block, there is no connection with water from the left to the right. Water has to come in from the radiator into this side, comes into this side, and goes out into the radiator. That's why they have the 2 hoses on them, coming in and out. Well, just watching these things, when you're going around a corner, the centrifugal force throws all the water to the right. And the left side wasn't getting any water. All it was getting was steam. So I took my radiator and put a divider in the top tank and the bottom tank, and I put 2 temperature gauges in the dashboard, and that thing would run at Bakersfield, come in after 40 laps at 190 degrees.
Right on.
And those guys were boiling the oil, and the rod bearings were going out of them and everything else. And I had a temperature gauge in the oil, and everything was just beautiful. That's all that made the difference, was that centrifugal force.
Now, what was the chassis in that car you built, in the midget you built?
Well, I bought the frame rails. God, what's the guy's name? I thought of it the other day.
It wasn't a Curtis. It was a your own chassis.
This was a rail job.
Okay.
Curtis didn't come out until after the war, way after the war. So these were rail jobs. And we didn't have quick change rear ends or nothing in those days. You know, we had old Franklin steering gears, you know, not these new nice things.
What was the RPM range in those engines?
Well, nobody had a tack, but I did. And the little Ford, about 5,000 was starting to go downhill. In other words, an engine, you can over-rev it and lose horsepower. But in a racetrack, you want to do that. You want to come out of the corner with the maximum power and torque you can get. And then you over-rev the engine going in, doesn't matter because you're backing off the horsepower anyway.
Mm-hmm.
So we never knew what we turned the chimes. Nobody had a tachometer. And I had a nice big tachometer in that thing. And we had no choice of gears except a Model T. We could get a 4.9, I think. And there was an Erskine, or was a 5.3. And we put that in the Model T rear end. And that was it. Well, finally, the first quick change I saw was called a sour, of all things. And it was in the drive shaft, right behind the little in and out box. And the U-joint was just moved back. And this thing had internal gear, if you know what that is. The teeth are in there, then the pinion gear rode in that thing. And by changing this gear, you could move this up and down. There was dowel pins here that you could change the ratio.
Oh, okay.
It worked beautiful. Mm-hmm. Nothing wrong with it. I think it was far better than the quick change rear ends, to be honest with you, because the internal gear, you had more than one tooth. When you have two pinions like this, you only got one tooth handling the torque.
Correct.
And this thing had about Humpty Dumpty teeth. That's why a planetary is so strong in a car.
Yeah.
So anyway, we went through all of that stuff, and of course we didn't have big wide wheels and tires, and in order to make the wheels a little bit wider, the rims that we bought were 3 inches wide. We'd put those in the lathe and cut them off on the drop center here, and then weld those two together, and we got about an extra, I don't know, 3/4 of an inch or something, and that was our wheels. And tires, Monkey Ward's, or Sears and Roebuck, I guess it was, had the only tires with knobs on them and everything else, and we didn't have much choice at all. And as far as on the Chime, we ran a mixture of gasoline and alcohol. I don't think it made much difference. But on the 60s, I think the guys were all running alcohol, finally.
Straight alcohol.
And you can cool an engine with fuel. You just dump a lot in there, and the vaporization of it takes the heat out of the engine. And I spent 20 years at Indianapolis. Not 20 years there, but the month of May I spent 20 years. Uh-huh. And those old Offies would compete with the Fords if they'd give them enough alcohol. Because an Offie wasn't very well designed in the cylinder head anyway. And when they took the fuel away and they had to run economy, that was the end of the Offies.
So what were you doing there at Indy? Did you have a car? You were working on a car?
Well, don't remind me of that. That's another story.
Okay.
As I say, I spent months back there because I was in the East with my company anyway. Al Stein called me up and said, I want to come to Indy. Would you help me? And I said, gee, Al, I said, it's awfully late now to get a hotel, but I'll try. So I had a lot of friends there, and I got him a room, and I called him up and I says, you fly on in, I'll pick you up, put him in the hotel. And the next day or the day after that, they were starting the practice runs. And Al and I were setting up in the grandstands on the first corner so we could see down here and see over there. And I said to Al, I said, you know, the Indy cars are 255 cubic inches now, and there's talk that they're going to cut them down to 180 cubic inches so the foreigners can come over here with their 3-liter cars. And I said, if they do that, Al, there's not going to be any engines, because you can't take a big 255 Offie, which was a 270 scaled down. Mm-hmm. And it'll take them years to get an engine to compete with what's coming over from Europe. And so we talked and talked and talked, and finally I said there's maybe a way to do this, and that Porsche has a little 4-cylinder engine that is 90 cubic inches, a liter and a half, and they run those things hard, and they never fly apart. They run them 24 hours at Le Mans in the little Porsche car. So if we took 2 of those, one in the front and one in the back, we'd have 180 cubic inches, and you'd have an engine that's reliable. You'd never have to worry about it. And so, lo and behold, I don't know how we got together on this thing. He was going to do it. And he had a friend that was flying for Pan Am to Europe, and he had this guy go to Porsche to buy some engines. Porsche wouldn't sell them. They said, we don't want our engines in somebody else's automobile. Okay. So that died, and the other thing that happened was that Indy never changed the rules. So old Stein, being hard-headed, went to the dealer and bought 3 911 6-cylinder engines, stock engines, and had Joe Huffaker start the chassis. And my idea was that you'd have the front engine with a transmission, because you need the weight on the front wheels, and the back engine would be just a clutch. And you'd start out, shift gears in the front one, get out of the piston, then drop the clutch in and go. To save weight.
Yeah.
Well, finally when I got home, went up to Huffaker's, here was these 2 engines with transmissions on both ends, and starters and everything you can imagine. And a great big 12-volt battery. So, anyway, Huffaker started this thing, and I don't know what got into him, whether he realized I don't want my name on that thing, so he quit. And Stein brought it over and started to complete it, and got it running. And I'm trying to think of the driver, Cheeseburg, I think, an Indy driver, took the thing out to some track up in Northern California and ran it around and thought it was really good. Well, Stein was having some camshafts ground in Los Angeles, and they screwed them up, and somebody made a cast iron cam for this steel. There was a replacement, and they ground those almost. We received them back in Indianapolis about 3 days before the end of qualifying. And we had the stock cams and the dumb engine. You couldn't put any compression in it because the way the cylinder heads were. And you need 13 to 1 to run alcohol. And I don't think he could get 10 to 1 in the damn thing. So anyway, I forgot to tell you the interesting story. Al called me up and said, I'm shipping the thing today by TWA, and I can't get over there. Will you go up and make sure that it gets on the airplane with all the toolboxes? So I went up to the airport, and here was the car on a big wooden pallet. about this thick. And it was on the scale, and it weighed 2,500 pounds. And I said to the guy, I said, how much does the car weigh? He says, 2,500 pounds. The pallet is 0 on the scale. So I called Al and I said, geez, don't ship that thing, Al. I said, you know, Indy cars weigh 1,500. So he says, no, ship it. So it arrived in Indianapolis. I think in Chicago, and they had to go up and truck it down or something. I can't remember how that was. We got off of the midgets, you know.
It's okay.
Anyway, would you believe that that damn thing with stock cams in it, and that all that weight was 6 miles an hour slow to qualify? So it wouldn't have taken much to qualify that crazy thing. It wouldn't have run, you know, probably would have burned up or something, but at least it would have made the main event. And so anyway, these cast iron cams arrived, and they had some hooligan up in Berkeley was working on the engine, and he put them in, and it made 2 laps, and the oil pressures went down below the ground, all the lobes off. These cast iron cams destroyed the engines. So it never did get a chance to really run with good cams anyway. And I doubt if you could do much better than the Porsche cams in the first place. It needed compression and a lot of it. So anyway, that was an interesting month of May I spent back there. And my job was to try to get this thing to steer. The geometry was so horrible that if you raised it up and down an inch, the wheels went like that. And the Bear company always had 2 wheel alignment set up there for the guys to use. And I worked on that thing for weeks, putting washers in it, big bolts, and fussing around. And I got it pretty good. But
everybody was watching you there, though.
And my friend Truebody was working on the springs and shocks, and he had those things in and out there about 100 times, trying to get the ride height more or less right. And it was a crazy month, I'll tell you. But it was fun to be there and with the guys and everything like that. That was...
all in Gasoline Alley there.
Yes, right. Oh, anyway, that's a long story. And poor old Al, we don't know where the car went. I don't think anybody. Somebody found the front hood on it. Bob Fian did the aluminum work, and it was the stupidest thing in the world. Here was this Porsche engine with this big blower out here, and that was sticking up in the air, and he went down here, put a great big grill in it down there. Oh, gee, it was something to behold.
So then what about when you started building another midget there?
Well, let's see. I'm trying to think. I remember the guy that made, Clyde Adams made the frame rails in those days, way back in the dark ages, and they were sold through Bell Auto Parts. Well, there's a fellow up in Stockton, Schmidt, I think his name is. What's his first name? Schmidt. He had a set of these frame rails. I was up there on something else years before, and I saw these frame rails sitting there. I called him up. I said, I want to buy those frame rails. He said, no, they're not for sale. So anyway, I said, well, you loan me one of them so I can make a pattern. Oh, sure. So he loaned me both of them. And I made my frame rails exactly like Clyde Adams. I bought a rear end from the guy in San Francisco. And I bought a brand new steering gear from the guy in Los Angeles that makes them. And I had...
Is that a Franklin steering?
No, this is what everybody uses.
Okay.
Schroeder.
Okay.
Schroeder. And in the rear end, I got all of the change gears and everything. I bought the aluminum wheels. There's a guy up in in San Francisco by the Cow Palace up there that is in the junk car business, has everything you can think of.
Yeah, go ahead.
What's his name? Jeez, I just talked to him the other day. Anyway, I had a front axle bent for some reason or other, and I had spindles and all the pieces and everything else. And I had the offy clutch housing that we used in the Hendersons in box, and I've got the drive shaft, tires, and everything else. But I'm never going to touch it. That's going to go to the junk one of these days. And I always wanted to get that thing on the dirt once more, just for the fun of it. But I can't do it, not now. I thought maybe you guys would be interested in my little Ford Roadster.
We are.
You are. How do you like that?
Is this the one you had at the... tell us about it, Jay.
Well, the whole car is built around a Ford 60 engine. 1937 Ford 60, and I always wanted to do something else with a 60 besides midgets. So, did you ever hear the name Herc Edwards?
No.
He raced with us guys. And Herc always liked Alaska, and he used to go up there hunting and fishing and everything, and he got a job with a Ford dealer. Can't think of where it was. But he called me up one day and says, we're closing out all the 60 parts. We got a lot of them, and you can have them if you'll fly them out of here. Otherwise, you're going to go to the junk dealer. I said, you crate them up, and I'll pay for it. So let me turn something else here. I don't know whether this will show up or not. That's the chassis. And the engine is not it's in the back, but we call that a mid-engine. And I made the transaxle out of old Ford parts and everything else. And so it's finished, upholstered and running. I made the wheels, the windshield, and I had the aluminum fabricated over in Oakland. There's a company over there, Steve Mall, and he did the aluminum on my framework and everything else. And the car weighs 1,600 pounds, and the engine is supercharged. That's a 37 Ford, which you can see the resemblance.
Ah, okay.
I tried to keep the car to look like a 37 Ford. The wheels, the headlights, the grille. These are the wooden forms called bucks that you use to form the aluminum.
Can you pick that up, maybe? So that wood on there is how you form the aluminum?
Yes. It has to be precision made. Doesn't look like it, but it has to be all formed like this. Then the guy rolls the aluminum and comes over and checks the fit of it, and if it isn't right, he rolls it a little more. This is the body, and I had a heck of a time with that front fender with a light in it there and everything. The back was a little difficult too. I never made that before. And this is the factory specifications on the little Ford 60. Shows the horsepower, the torque, and then on the back they show the engine in cross section.
And when was that? What was the year on that? Basically, then before that originally, was that still in the 50s or?
The Fords were made from 37, 38, 39, and 40 was the last year. 4 years. It was an economy car, and nobody wanted economy.
Oh, okay.
Now then, my engine is pretty complicated. It's fuel injected and supercharged and refrigeration intercooled. In other words, I have a complete refrigeration system that your car does for air conditioning just to cool the supercharged air, because that comes out of there real hot.
And then what's the brand of the supercharger?
This is an Eaton. They make every size, and this happens to be off of a Mercedes-Benz, but I got that just for the size of it to fit the engine. And I have a coil on every spark plug. I have 8 coils on this thing, and I changed the water pumps to really cool at 60. I went another step more than the midgets, and it cools.
And so you put in, like today, you have a coil per cylinder?
Yes, right. Like all the new modern
cars.
cars.
Sure. Just like my truck does.
Yeah. And the computer runs the ignition and the fuel injection. But the stupid aftermarket computers leave a little something to behold. I can't get it to run the idle motor, which is critical. Do you have any idea what the idle motor is?
No, go ahead.
It's a tiny little stepper motor, about 1.5 inches long and maybe 1.5 inches in diameter. And it has a little plunger on it that goes into the manifold. And the computer tells it, if you're idling, say, and you put the car in gear, the engine wants to slow down. This little motor lets air into the manifold. You turn on the air conditioner, if you know your modern cars just stay at the same idle, they never change. In gear, out of gear, air on or in. Well, I need that thing, and they can't make it work. So anyway, this is just showing the bits and pieces of it. Here's this lousy aftermarket stuff. And this is the engine, transaxle and everything. Off of the dyno was putting it in the car. That's almost my Harley back there.
So who dynoed it?
I did. I had my own dyno.
Okay.
Engine dyno, not a...
Right.
And that's the transaxle that I made all out of Ford parts.
And when did you make that dyno?
No, I had that for years and years.
Forget that maximum performance?
Well, you can't tune an engine unless you have a dyno.
Right.
When you're starting in with fuel injection, you're just dead in the water if you don't have a way to put a load on the engine.
Right.
And my brother bought this dyno 100 years ago. It was a big Clayton, and it had the capacity to hold the torque. I had a 16-cylinder Marmon that I fixed up a little bit, and my Corvair with a V12 Jag in it, I had that on the dyno.
Oh, okay,
And,
yeah, I've seen that. So when, getting back to midget, Piper was your driver?
Yes, yes, right.
Okay, so then, what about all those days that you guys were driving up and down the highway from, how many days a week were you racing?
Well, we started to race just Sunday night in Fresno, and gradually we got Bakersfield on Saturday night, so that was the weekend gone. And way back when we started, Piper had a 36 two-door sedan, and 36, yes. and we tow the midget with that thing because the Chevys didn't have the horsepower that a flathead Ford had. And I didn't tell you this, that when we got that Henderson to the Kime to really running, Piper used to drive that thing to Los Angeles every Thursday and race at Gilmore. And if he couldn't make the main, but he ran the B, and he did that to try to get a ride in an Offie. And he did.
Did he?
He did.
Yeah.
But not a very good Offie, because the good Offies had good drivers and everything else. So anyway, I always had to drive him home at night because he never went to bed, and he slept in the back of the car. And this old Ford had a boot in it in the rear tire.
And a boot is tire within a tire, you're saying?
Well, you used to take a tire and cut a section out of it, because if you had a hole in your main carcass here, the tube would just blow out. So we'd take a tire and saw out this piece and put in there. Well, of course, it was out of balance by a ton. We had no way to balance the thing.
Right.
And that thing used to shake. You couldn't believe it. The whole car was just shaking. And here we're driving 60 or 65 miles an hour with a boot in the tire.
Bouncing around back there, waking up Piper.
Oh, Jesus. And old Piper woke up one day and he hit me on the shoulder and says, "Slow down."
And the highway then wasn't anywhere near what it is now.
Two lanes. Two lanes.
One each way.
One time when we were going to Fresno, Bakersfield rather, the farmers were on the road with their trucks and tractors and everything else, and Piper came up and couldn't go, so he just drove down in the ditch like that. You know, they were real sharp, and back up, and away he went. And coming home one night, he was driving until we stopped for breakfast in somewhere down there, Modesto. And this old farmer there didn't have a trailer. I think he had a Model A Ford or something. Piper came up to him and just started to push that guy. I don't know how fast we were going. And I often wondered what that guy thought about when he take his foot off the throttle
and kept on going. Huh? And that's what Mason said when you guys were driving, that it was the same way. Of guys were actually racing each other with cars to get to the track.
We never had time, you know. It was always flat out, and how we ever lived through those days, I never know. The things that we did, the stupid things, and everything else.
Now, what did you do for your career, Jay?
Well, I did
for employment.
I told you I was going to join the Air Force, and my oldest brother was a genius in electronics. He had a little tiny factory in San Bruno, California, where the big fire was the other day, making vacuum tubes about that tall, and they were he was a hot rodder and tube manufacturer, and the only market was the amateur radio guys would buy these 100-watt tubes, which was the top of the line, and that's as far as you could go legally for amateurs. And in 1940, the war was going in Europe already, and we weren't into it. And America had developed radar, but we never did anything with it. Didn't have any use for it. The British saw the advantage of radar to be able to see the Germans coming in with their airplanes and shoot them down. But they didn't have any vacuum tubes with power. So they came to Washington and talked to the Air Force there, and they GE didn't have anything, Westinghouse didn't have anything at all in that what they needed for radar. So one of the guys there said, there's a little tiny company out West Coast that I think has something that will fit your bill. So they all came out to San Bruno, and I think my brother had like 11 workers. And they looked at these tubes and says, yes, those will do. So he called me up and says, you got to come to work for me. I said, wait a minute, I want to fly airplanes. I don't know anything about vacuum tubes. He says, you got to help me here, brother. He knew I could machine and weld with a torch, you know, and do everything. So anyway, I said, well, I'll tell you what to do, because the war hadn't started over here yet. I said, I'll give you 1 year, I'll lock up my house and rent something over there, and then I want to come back over here and race cars. So anyway, I did that, got over there in August, and got moving. And I had to set up a machine shop to make dies for these radio tube parts. And I called Skeets Jones, and he came over and worked for me, and Al Sievers came over, and somebody else that I got over there. And we had a guy that was working for us with his machinery, and we bought him and moved him in. And then when we got priorities so we could buy new tools, we were able to build the shop up. And within about less than a year, we had 1,800 employees. And we thought the Japanese were going to land on the West Coast. So the military said, you've got to get out of here because we can't lose this product. So we looked at Reno, and there was nothing there, and we went to Salt Lake City and built a plant in the dead of winter and hired 1,800 Mormons. And they worked 24 hours a day, 7 days a week until the war was over. So I had a lot of fun doing that. I had 30 shops in the Bay Area working full-time for me. I had pattern makers, foundries, machine shops, steel shops, everything you could think of. Because we had to build everything. There's nothing you could buy. And I ended up in the hospital. I had pneumonia. So I didn't get any work done up there that I was supposed to do. And they put me on a train, and I had a bed where I was able to lay down and get back to San Francisco, and went to the hospital there, and they took my tonsils out for what, I don't know. And
that was standard practice then.
I guess it was, yeah. So anyway, I got back on my feet, but I lived right near the plant, and I was on call 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So I said, the hell with this, I'm going to get away from that plant, and I rented a little tiny ranch in Los Altos and moved down to there and got my health back. And
How old were you then?
oh, God, I don't know.
You were 19.
No, no.
In your 20s, 30s?
In my 20s, late 20s, I think. Anyway,
Now, did you have a college education, or what was your education level?
just barely high school. Well, anyway, living down there, spring came around, and this property that I leased had a huge big cherry tree on it. I mean a big thing. I never saw one that big. The cherries always get ripe on the top, naturally, and ripen down. There was a huge big wooden ladder with 3 legs. And so I got this big old ladder out there, and I took a bucket and climbed up there, and I picked about 6 cherries. Had to come down, move the ladder, 6 cherries. I said, oh, hell, I got to fix that. I'm going to make a machine to do that. Not to pick the cherries, but to lift me up so I could maneuver around. So I built in the factory that I had a warehouse with everything in it that you could imagine, motors and gearboxes and everything under the sun. So I built this thing to run electrically. And the reason I did that was to have a control in there that everybody has now. This control box was only about that big, and a lever came out with a knob on it, and if you wanted the bucket to go up, you lifted the knob up. If you wanted to go down, you pushed the knob down. If you wanted to make the boom longer, you pushed it that way or this way to shorten it, to turn it to the side. And I could go in 3 directions at once. If I put the stick over there and lifted up on it, I'd be going over and up like that. Anyway, so...
Cherry picker.
The cherry picker. I named it the cherry picker. And I realized when I got it finished and went down to the orchard to pick cherries, there was no damn way that a farmer was going to ever buy that expensive machine to pick cherries or apricots or anything else. So I put the thing away and didn't know what to do with it. I just left it out in the backyard. And at the factory in San Bruno, we had a huge big cafeteria. It was 2 floors, the ground floor and the second floor. And I was putting in a new switchboard, and I had the telephone engineers down there to look at where I was going to put it and see what I needed to solve them for the equipment. And we were sitting here at the windows looking out on the courtyard there, and in drove a little telephone truck with a little tiny wooden ladder on it that the guy could raise up and pull the extension on it with ropes and climb up there. And I says, what do you use that thing for? And he says, well, every now and then we have to put the drops to the house. We can't put it from the telephone pole. We have to go down here maybe 100 feet and go to the house then. So we need that thing to get out in what they call mid-span. And I said, gee, I got a machine that is all electric powered to do that. And the guy said, we'd like to see it. Well, it was mounted on the crummiest old truck that I couldn't buy a truck, you know. You couldn't find one anywhere. And I couldn't afford a new one if you could get it. So I had this old Ford truck. It was all rusty and everything else. And the machine was kind of crude looking anyway. But it did work and everything else. So I said, well, the next time you come down, I'll have it over here. So I did. And they looked at it, rode in it and everything. Said, gee, we'd like to take that thing and experiment with it. I said, no. If you're interested, I'll build a good one. And so they didn't say much, you know, about buying it or anything. So I just felt I'd build one. So I did. I built a real beautiful one. Did you ever hear of Tommy the Greek?
Yes.
Tommy the Greek came over and painted it for me. Gray and red. And so anyway, I finished the thing. It took me 5 months to build this thing, and I was able to buy a new truck. And they came down and looked at it and said, geez, we want to take that thing. And I said, well, here's the problem. You guys are going to be running this thing, and if there was any accident where some guy made some dumb mistake, I don't want to be sued. So you buy the thing, and then if you get finished with it, I'll buy it back. But you've got to own it when you use it. And they said, okay, that's no problem. They took that thing for 14 months and gave me an order for 4 machines. And I didn't have a business. I didn't have
Drawing or nothing.
nothing. And so anyway, I rented a building in, oh God, where was it? Below Mountain View, whatever's down there.
Sunnyvale. Anyway.
Sunnyvale. Well, luckily I had all my friends all around the country that could help me. So there was a outfit in San Francisco that I used all the time, big press brakes, formed up the boom sections for me, punched the holes in them, and then I took them over to Freddie Mageau, and he welded it all together and everything. And I was able to build that thing fast because of the facilities. And I didn't order the generators and the expensive things till the very last minute. And I was able to get my bills discounted, paid them off with the money that they bought the machine from. So lo and behold, delivered these, and they gave me an order for 14, and they raised it to 28 and then to 48. So I had a small business. And I thought, well, geez, if San Francisco buys 48 of these things, Los Angeles ought to buy 48 at least. Well, whatever San Francisco does, Pacific Telephone Company down there does the opposite. So I had to figure out how to sell these things, and I put together a demonstrator and started across America, driving the truck and stopping at the telephone offices and everything else. And I drove trucks for about 10 years. And everybody would buy one, or one here and one there, which is just a lost leader. And it did get going very slowly. And the reason it got going slowly was not the union problems. The workmen just loved it because it reduced their climbing up that pole. And when they had to drill a hole in a pole with a brace and bit, and hang it out here with their belt on, you know.
That was my career. I did that.
Did you?
Yeah.
No.
I know, yeah.
Jesus Christ. You'd hit a knot.
Yeah.
You know, you always had a dull drill.
Brace and bit all the way, yeah.
Well, I took a big impact wrench and got a chuck. I can't remember how I fitted that chuck on there. It had a hexagon drive in it, and I made all of the drills with this shaft on it so I could just snap the drills in there. And this impact wrench would not only turn, but it would hammer. Guys, we could go through a pole with nothing flat. Put the bolt on, put the socket on it, and bang, tighten it up.
You're my pal.
Now, some of the telephone companies, they all had square washers, you remember?
Correct.
And the specification was that the washer had to be square. Well, the guy would take his wrench and tighten it up, and the washer would turn. He'd back the nut off and hammer it like that, tighten it up and everything else. So I came along with the impact wrench, and he says, you got to square that washer. I said, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to make round washers. What do you have square washers for? And I used to carry dollars, silver dollars. You could get them then. And I would lay those down and show the guy how many, the same diameter without the corners on it. So it didn't reduce the pressure and the holding capability, but you could get about 30% more washers by making them round out of the same.
Correct.
Well, anyway, I missed the story that made the thing a success was the fact that I could put the strand up in the front and the cable in the back and go up there and lay the strand up. tension and come back and lash the cable.
So was that like a ladder truck? They had the electric ladder truck or the Telstra boom?
Telstra boom.
Okay.
And with my automobile experience, I was able to stabilize that truck. All of the machines that were made hydraulic were so heavy and so unbalanced that they had to stop and put big jacks down to stabilize it. Well, I couldn't put a jack down because I had to go from pole to pole. My boom would reach out 30 feet and hold 600 pounds, even with the truck slanted. So anyway, that's another story.
So the Telstra boom was yours? Or that design?
When did you quit the telephone company? You should have seen these things.
I've seen them. I worked for PG&E.
Oh, you did?
But Telstra was interesting because the Telstra was, like you say, electric and more mobile than the hydraulic boom that PG&E had, although the hydraulic boom at PG&E was used for setting poles.
I made 4 machines for PG&E to put up cable, aluminum cable, all at the same time. There was a guy in PG&E called Oldershaw, who was one of the engineers, and he came down to my shop and said, you know, I see this thing for the telephone company and I've got some ideas. And he says, have you ever considered building a machine to change the street lights? I said, no, I haven't done that. But he said, I want to buy one.
The lamplighter.
The lamplighter. I named it the lamplighter. So anyway, Oldershaw was a neat guy, and I built big machines, higher and higher and higher for the PG&E because you're up in the air. Telephone companies very low, generally out like this. So I made these machines, and we could put 4 reels of cable on the truck, and they went up here to the fair leads and went off and everything else. And I ended up with making all of the equipment to do the telephone work, which required a lot of deals on the truck. And I finally got to the point where I could run the strand and the cable, lash the things together on the truck, and put it all up in one pass. And a lot of that story could go on forever.
But that all started with building midgets.
Yeah, I guess.
So then that gave you the money to go back to racing at a level you wanted to be at, huh?
Well, the wonderful part of it was, and a painful part of it was, I had to live in airplanes to develop the market. You know, people can build anything, but to figure out how to sell the damn thing is the hardest part of business. It isn't building it. You can do that, but to figure out how to sell something. And that was an endless job, but I got to see America, every inch of America in summer and winter and spring and fall. And then the weekend you can't sell anything. So what do you do in the weekend? You know, I went to all of the racetracks in the Midwest and in the East and everything, even up at the Silver Lakes up there where they're running right now. What do they call that thing in New York? The pardon?
Was it at Watkins Glen?
Well, maybe it is Watkins Glen. Anyway, it's a road course, and the Indy cars run once a year, and NASCAR.
Yeah, Watkins Glen, yeah, in New York, yeah.
Just like they do up here at Sears Point. And I got to see that when the Formula One was there. And a guy in a midget damn near won that thing without a transmission. He took those foreigners on, and that thing Roger Ward drove it.
Oh, okay.
It was a beautiful little offie. And here I was driving this big old telephone truck up there and had to find somewhere to park it, you know. And as I say, I got to see everything in America. But I lived in airplanes. Man, did I ever fly.
And DC-3s, DC-6s, or?
Well, by then, the DC-4s were just coming on. The 6s couldn't get to New York. The 7s could get to New York. I got a chance to ride in the first 707. The second week it was flying. American Airlines had the first ones, and they were having fuel gauge problems. They didn't know whether the tanks were full or not. And I was in New York, coming home on this weekend, and I picked up the paper, and here was a big full-page ad on American Airlines with their new jet. And the story was that it would take you a year to get a ticket on one of those things, because everybody, they didn't have very many of them. I called up the bloody airline. I had booked my flight on TWA, and I says, I want to ride on your plane. It went to Los Angeles instead of San Francisco. And the guy kind of hesitated a minute. Says, is it coach or first class? I says, it's first class. I had a ticket. I went out to the airport the next morning, and I saw the airplane there, and I went out. There wasn't anybody at the gate. I walked right out there, and there was a guy looking it over, and I said, is this thing going to fly today? He says, yes, it's going to fly. So I rushed back and changed my ticket with TWA and bought that ticket. I never sat down on the whole flight to Los Angeles. Ginger Rogers was up there and a couple of movie stars with her, and Jimmy Doolittle was there in that airplane. Yeah. And we were drinking and having laughs and fun all the way to Los Angeles. The second week that it was in the air. And then the 747 came out, and the same thing. I had to go to Los Angeles. But I got a ride on that the first week it was in the air. And that was an experience too. I thought if you sat up here, you could look forward, but the window you couldn't. You still had to look out the side. But that was a big old airplane when it came around. And I got to ride in the supersonic from London.
It went from, across the Atlantic?
That was fun. I rode in 5 Russian jets, 2 English, and 1 French, which was flying. And Continental had these damn French turboprops. And so anyway, I had a good life. Had a lot of fun. I took advantage of everything.
And then you were living in home base was in Atherton, or where did?
Well, eventually was, yeah. I lived in Atherton, and so anyway. We're gonna knock this thing off.
We are. I want to ask you one question.
Okay.
Who was? Did you have like a best mechanic, or you were the mechanic all the time?
What do you mean?
In midgets.
I was a damn mechanic, yes.
And the car owner.
I had to do all the dirty work.
And did you still stay in contact with Agabashian and
Yeah.
Piper and everybody else later
Oh,
on?
yes, right up to the end. However, I was traveling so much that I couldn't go to Walnut Creek to the races and things. And when I came home for the weekend, I had to be with my family, and I couldn't go to the bloody races very much, but I did back east.
I knew a guy by the name of Jack Newell, and he was best friends with Agabashian back in high school. And Jack Newell and his wife kind of adopted my wife and I, and he lives over in American Canyon, and he made his money in mobile home parks and became a very rich guy. But when I met him, he didn't tell me that he knew Agabatian. And he used to ride on the back of Agabatian's motorcycle down the railroad tracks in Berkeley, and then Jack would say, "You're going to kill me. You're crazy," you know. But I didn't know him until it was 2 years after Agabatian had died. Otherwise, I was going to try to get those guys back together.
No, I saw Aggie at Sacramento dirt track mile. Got to drive Agajanian's Offie, and he won that thing. Blew all the Eastern guys and everything else. That reminds me of something about midgets. Anyway, all through his whole life, Aggie was just a prince of a guy. There was nobody finer than him. He was just a gentleman, really. He wasn't the usual drunk, loudmouth guys. Anyway, I was at San Jose on the 5/8 mile when he flipped his Chevrolet, not his car, it was his friend's car. He spun it and it went into the mud and flipped over and broke his jaw and everything. He could have got killed in that damn thing. But he drove at San Jose after that, and he was a driver, I'll tell you. So,
one of the best.
I wanted something on the midgets. What was it? I thought about it and forgot it. Oh, Jesus. What the hell?
And what is that? Is that a class reunion or?
This is the Oakland Auto Club. Grew up, and that's Tommy the Greek right there. I can't name very many of them. Can't see them too much. But anyway, there's old Piper in the Ford.
And your Corvair with the Jaguar engine in it, that was your latest thing before your Ford?
Yes, this was finished before the Ford. And that's the transaxle in the Corvair with a Jaguar. General Motors made 17 of these for their Tempest dragsters.
Okay, yeah.
And this thing had a drive shaft 3/4 of an inch in diameter, and it bent 4 inches in a torque tube up to the big 421 HO engine. And I knew they were coming out with this thing. And so I went to GM. I had keys to the door there. I bought a lot of trucks. And so the guy that designed this thing was named Bill Collins. I went up the engineering department and found him and said, I've got to have one of those. I bought the car. I have the engine, but I need the because the production cars only had 2-speed here, a ring and pinion, and a torque converter here. And this is a 4-speed. They took another planetary, put there, and the dragsters had a clutch on them. And they won everything in America. They had 6 teams, each had 2 cars. Mickey Thompson was one of them on the West Coast. And they blew off the Chrysler Hemis because the weight was in the back and the Chrysler was weight in the front. And they only had 10-inch tires, and the Chrysler couldn't get traction. They just spin the wheels. And this thing just went off and blew them off, and they outlawed it. Nobody would race against them. So finally, by the time I found 3 of these, I got Mickey Thompson's, and one in Florida and one in Ohio. And I looked at my Tempest and I said, no, I don't want to cut that up. And I don't see that I'm going to gain a lot of fun with that. So I built the Corvair around that. That's what I have in the Corvair. And this crazy Jaguar engine, there's a pile of junk up there, but was one. So I took and adapted a Buick V6, fuel injection and ignition on this side, and a computer here, and another one with a computer over here. 2 Buick V6 injectors, and I don't think you can get that, can you? I don't think it'll show up. Not important.
That's for that rear end. So wrapping it up, Jay, you know what? We really appreciate that we're able to come down here and get some of this history from you.
Confuse you.
No, you know, it's pretty unique where you and Bob and John Randish, you know, it's unique to have guys who can still talk at this level of engineering or whatever else. A lot of people, you know, didn't do anything in their lives. They had a job or whatever else. They didn't go racing. And that's one of the things that John Randish said, you know.
Most of the racing today, even then, was people with money bought everything. They didn't build anything.
Right.
Just pulled all the parts together.
Mm-hmm.
And the guys, when I first went to Indianapolis, everybody built their car. And Gasoline Alley was these old wooden garages there with no air conditioning or anything. The doors were all open. And if you had a pit pass, you could just walk down there and walk in the garage and talk to the guy. And you saw what people did. And I couldn't believe it, how many four-wheel drives there were that nobody ever knew or talked about.
So Mickey Thompson's four-wheel drive was nothing new.
Nothing new at all. He had a front drive. The last car he built was a front drive and a rear steer. The rear steered the car.
What kind of speeds were going on at Indy at that time?
I can't remember.
150 or
Oh, I don't think so.
120 or so?
Oh, I have the book with all of it on. I can't remember. But the thing is, now, as far as I'm concerned, the only racing in the world is NASCAR. No, I don't mean that they're not all the same and everything else, but those little V8 engines with 360 cubic inches are putting out 900 horsepower and turning 9,000, sometimes 10. And they run 500 miles on gasoline and they don't blow up. Once in a great while, you'll see smoke come out of one of them because they break the valve springs, and that's about all. They never burn out the rods or the pistons or nothing. Those things just run.
Yeah, it's unbelievable those RPMs that those V8 engines are turning out.
They're just unbelievable. And I've been to the shops back east. I've been to Hendricks and Childress, and oh gosh, the guy that's been there forever. I can't think of his name. But anyway, I don't like wrecks. I don't watch NASCAR to see wrecks. I just look at those guys and realize that the pits, you can win or lose in the pits. If a guy drops a drive nut, he can be 6 places back when he goes out.
Yeah.
It's just unreal.
Yeah, and those specialized pit people and everybody else, athletes down there.
They practice all week. I've been to their Jack Roush's place, and they have a special place there with a wall where they jump over the wall. Here comes the car, and they time that to see, because 1 second is 3 places.
Yeah, that's how Matt Kenseth makes his way.
Oh, I mean, it is something to behold.
Well, anyway, I want to say this. Again, thank you again for coming down here to see you. And ProMotion Video will move on with Steve Hazelton and Dennis Parker here at Jay Eitel's in Palo Alto.
Okay.
All right, big guy.